6th of September, 1991. The dark cloud that hung over our little city. That was the day Sarah Tanning vanished. Everyone in Hereford and their dogs know how the story unfolds. That evening, Sarah left her home around 8 p.m. to spend the weekend at her grandmother's in London. But she never arrived. Her car was found by the West Mercia Police Department 2 days later, parked on the side of a country road. The Ford Taurus was locked, with her purse and bag of clothes on the driver's seat. Her trail went cold from there. That was until 2017, when a local 23-year-old man led the West Mercia police search team deep into the woods, straight to the exact spot where Sarah Tanning's remains laid, buried under 6 feet of dirt. That man was me, Eli Azari. If you're a Hereford local, you might be familiar with my name. Strange stories are contagious and they spread faster than wildfire. Not a day after the incident, my name was all over the local newspaper. Hereford man solves 26 years missing person case. That's what the headlines read. But they were wrong. I wasn't the one who solved the case. It was Sarah. She found justice for herself from beyond the grave. When the police dug up her body, the DNA on her coat was analysed and a suspect was later identified, charged and eventually sentenced for her murder. Justice was delivered, and it was all thanks to Sarah. 5 years have gone by, and still I can bring back every detail of that day in the forest. On that early winter morning, I heard Sarah's voice whistling through the trees, and it told me where to find her bones. Voices are important, and they can tell you a great deal about a spirit. Some of the voices I hear in my head are sweet, soothing, easy on the ear like a nice song. Some are scratchy, raspy, almost primal. Sarah's voice was quiet and brittle, like she could have crumbled into tears at any moment. I'll tell you the story of what happened when I first heard that forlorn voice. This is the same story I told the detectives in the interview room when they asked how I discovered Sarah Tanning's remains in the woods. And it's the same story I told anyone else who cared to listen. Many people listened. Not a lot of people, believe me though. I don't blame them. Spirits are something you need to see to believe. But know that everything I'm about to tell you is the truth. Every word of it. This is a story about the dead souls who wander our earth, searching for homes they can no longer return to. A story about how the line between our world and the afterlife is thinner than we think. For me to tell you this story, I'll need to retrace my steps back to the beginning, back to 27 Brigham Street, back to the morning where it all started. 8th of September 2017. It was supposed to be a normal morning. A morning like any other. I woke up to the sound of classical music. Debussy's Clair de Lune drifted through my headphones as I climbed out of bed. The moment I took my headphones off, the whispers began. I could hear the dim mingle of voices echoing from that far-off empty corridor in my mind. The medication Dr. Burton prescribed me usually made the voices go away, but they'd always return. They were always there, waiting, whispering at the edge of my hearing. Most of the time I could never make out what they were saying. But I was used to the noise. 15 years had given me enough time to adjust. The voices in my head were now as routine to me as breathing or blinking. It wasn't a perfect life, but I still had my sanity, and that was enough for me. I nearly lost what little sanity I had that morning. I made my way to the bathroom to freshen up, feeling a faint stabbing pain in the back of my head. I tried my best to ignore it for now. I'd find some paracetamol later. When I looked into the mirror, I saw a face that I could barely recognize. My eyes were sunken and bloodshot like I'd been crying. I was. Crying in my sleep, I thought to myself. But why? I couldn't remember. The events of my dreams all seemed to mingle and blur into one another. It's probably just another nightmare, I guessed. I had been seeing more of them lately. I always died in my nightmares. Brutal, tragic deaths. But the strange part was that I'd never die as myself. I'd always die as someone else, with a different face. Yes, it was only a nightmare, but still I couldn't shake the feeling I was forgetting something. Something important. Call it a hunch. I took off my clothes and stumbled into the shower. I switched the temperature to warm and leaned forward, one hand against the wall, letting the water stream down my back. I felt it again. A needling headache behind my right ear. It was worsening. I winced, raising a hand to touch the spot where I felt a sharp electric pain. That's how I found the wound. When I looked at my hand afterwards, it was smudged with a red paste. The blood streamed down onto the wet shower floor and slipped through the drain, mingling with the water. Suddenly, I remembered what my nightmare was about. The memories all flooded back to me in brief glimpses. I closed my eyes, and the horror of my nightmare replayed itself in my mind. I was crying, running through the woods, feeling adrenaline pumping through my veins. "Help!" I yelled at the top of my lungs, but the wind drowned out my voice and no one could hear me. Footsteps were closing in on me, growing louder and louder by the second. Then a hand grabbed my arm and swung me around. It happened so fast. In a blur, I could almost hear the hammer cracking against my skull, a thud, and then darkness, and then nothing. My eyes snapped open. I froze, feeling my heart sink. I felt like someone was twisting my organs. I tried steadying my breathing to stop the thunder in my heart. What is going on? I looked at the blood on my hands and sudden realization struck me like a cannonball. My nightmares were seeping into reality. I tried to wash out the wound with running water. "Don't worry, that blood isn't yours," I suddenly heard one of the voices in my head saying. It was so quiet, I almost had to strain to hear it. "You're reliving my death, the pain I suffered that night. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and the pain will go away." I did what the voice told me. When I opened my eyes, the sharp stabbing pain was gone. I felt around the back of my head. There was no blood there, no wound. I was only imagining things. I'm losing it. I stumbled out of the shower, dried myself with the towel, and dashed to my bedroom. I flung open my wardrobe and picked out a large coat, a pair of jeans, and Doc Martens. I was out of the front door quicker than a bat out of hell. I needed to see Dr. Burton right away. The blistering wind whipped and lashed against my face as I stepped out into the cold, pulling my collar up. I looked up at the morning sky. Clouds gathered above, and snowflakes drifted lazily in the air, dancing to the tune of the wind. Chills ran down my tingling spine as I rushed down the street. The streets appeared deserted, and lonesome figures that I passed along the way were all caught up in their own ordinary lives. As I hurried, I desperately tried to flag down a taxi. I wasn't far from Dr. Burton's clinic, but I'd sure get there quicker if someone gave me a lift. No one stopped. Thus it is then. I made it to the 469 bus stop and approached an old lady who was sitting under the shelter. "Excuse me, miss, do you know what time the next bus is due?" No response. She flat out ignored me. No, not ignored. She didn't even seem to register that I was standing there, talking to her. I tried again. Miss, sorry to disturb you, but do you know when the next bus is coming?" Silence. I waved a hand over her face. She didn't even flinch. It was almost as if she couldn't see me. I was invisible. Bus 469 arrived a moment later, and as the passengers queued up to board, they slipped through me, in the same way grains of sand might slip through a clenched fist. "They can't see you," that voice in my head told me. "Think of it like a veil. There's a thin veil separating them from us, the world of the living from the dead." My heart dropped to the ground. "Us? Am I dead too?" The voice let out a chuckle. "No, you're not dead, Eli. Your soul still belongs to the world of the living. You're just a visitor here. A guest of sorts. A rush of relief flooded over me. I watched as the bus drifted away into the distance. How did I end up here, in this place? I thought to myself. And how do I know all of this is even real? My mind keeps playing tricks on me. I don't even know what's real anymore. It is real. All of this. Even the voices you hear in your head. But how is that possible? The voice in my head didn't answer the question. Follow the wind. That's all it said. I could feel the air current shifting. I moved, letting the motion of the wind carry me forward. The drifting wind led me to the middle of a dark forest. Tall, bony pines stretched up like thin arrows into the sky. Among the dark, swaying trees, I saw something that chased the sleep out of my eyes. The snow was heavy, but I could still make out dark figures stalking between the trees. They moved with a slow, shuffling, awkward gait, dragging their feet through the deep snow, one laboured step at a time. I descended down a slope to get a closer look at them. I approached one of them, a young boy. He must have been around 11 or 12. He looked at me absent-mindedly, as motionless as a mannequin. There was a bullet hole in his forehead. His eyes were a dull blue, and they had a hideous veil over them that chilled my bones. I looked at the others. They all had the same pale blue eyes with no iris. So empty and wide. It was like they were staring at me from the hollow eye sockets of an old skull. I felt myself shivering, and it wasn't from the cold. Some of them had mangled faces, slithers of brain matter and bone plastered on them. Some of their heads dangling from the bloody stump that was their neck. Others were missing their arms. Terrified, I edged back, ready to run. I jolted when I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned around and saw it was another one of them. Her tousled blonde hair danced to the wind. She had a smile on her face, but those icy blue eyes distracted me from it. Dried blood clung to her hair and fell across her forehead. "They won't hurt you," she said. "They just want to find their way home. That's all they want. They've been looking for years. Some of them probably don't even know they're dead." Her voice. It was the same voice I'd heard in my head earlier on. "Who are you?" I asked, trying not to let her hear my anxiety. "Well, I was Sarah Jennifer Tanning," she said. "Names don't matter much in this place." I looked over at the lumbering figures. They were mindlessly shuffling around in circles, whispering gibberish to themselves. All the voices I hear in my head, they come from them, don't they? They come from the spirits of the dead. Yeah, some of them died even before your great-grandparents. They're stuck here, forever, wandering in this limbo. She paused. She looked across at me and I stopped dead in my tracks. "I don't know how, but you're able to hear us and see us too. You have some sort of gift, or curse, depending on how you look at it. Is this hell? I don't know where this is. My guess is it's a place trapped between the world of the living and the afterlife, a middle ground. No man's land. Bitter souls who can't find rest linger here, unable to move on." She started walking. The twigs and leaves snapped and cracked under her barefoot as she went. People are angry when their loved ones pass away. The dead are angry too, and upset. Regretful about the words left unsaid. She suddenly stopped. "I'm sorry that I brought you here. I'll help you get back home. I just wanted to ask you a favour. Well, two." She looked down at the ground and pointed at it. "My body was buried here, right under this patch of earth that I'm standing on. The police were never able to find it in the end," she sighed. "Please let them know I'm buried here. Give my family closure. Let me get a proper burial so I can finally find peace." I nodded. "I'll do that." Second, please tell my son I love him. He was only 8 when I died. He's probably a little older than you by now. His name's James. She chokes up a little. Tell him I never stopped thinking about him. Not ever. He probably won't believe you spoke to me. Just tell him I said, keep singing with the birds. He'll know what that means. Promise me you'll do that. I promise. She smiled at me. It was the softest smile, and it nearly tore my heart apart. Thank you, Eli, she said, cupping my hands in hers. Then suddenly she began to disappear, fading away like a dandelion drifting in the wind. I watched as all the other spirits faded away too. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I was alone. I was surrounded by the same tall pines, but it had stopped snowing. The sky seemed to be clearing up, and I saw a faint breath of sunlight escaping through the clouds. I was back in the world of the living. My world. I looked down at the ground beneath me and took a deep breath. Then I reached in my pocket and dialed 999 for the police. Emergency. Which service do you require? Fire, police, or ambulance? Police, please. Yes. A woman went missing back in 1991. Sarah Tanning? I cleared my throat. I think I know where she is.